All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to yet another live stream here on Davies Media Design. My name is Mike Davies. Let me know if you guys can see my screen okay and hear me okay. Everything's looking good on my end. Hopefully no technical issues today. But today we're going to be editing this photo here. And I actually, for the preview, I only edited the photo itself as is, as you see here. Still a really cool photo, but what I'm going to try to do today, time permitting, is I'm going to try to replace the sky in here. And I've downloaded a photo of like some clouds. I've got the download link in the description of this video, so you guys should have access to that download there. And if not, definitely let me know. But I've also got this photo right here, and this is just going to be downloaded directly through my site. When you type in the URL or copy and paste the URL into your browser, it should just download immediately. So anyway, before we dive into this, of course, I want to direct you guys over to my website at daviesmediadesign.com. As always, we have tons of GIMP video and text tutorials on here, so definitely check that out. You can also enroll in my best-selling GIMP photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher on Udemy, and those links should be in the description already, so definitely check those out. As I mentioned, I'm going to be using this photo right here. It's a free photo from Pixabay. I just went with the 1920 by 1280. Hopefully that one will work. I haven't tried it out yet again, so you guys will be watching me work this out live as we go. And if it doesn't work out, I'll just download the larger version. You do need a free account in order to do that, so I'll probably have to log in order to do that. So hopefully I don't need to do that. But anyway, here is the photo I took. This is a cool photo of some modern architecture. It's like a house located in Denver, and I really like this house. And I've actually used it for my How to Design a Magazine cover. I used a different photo, a different angle of this house, but I really like this house. And I'm getting a yo and from Nothi. Sorry if I'm pronouncing the name wrong, but what's going on? And okay, so I just want to announce real quick too before I dive into this. Next week, over the weekend, I'm putting together a shoot with some models, so I should have some really cool photos for you guys next week. That doesn't include there's probably going to be architecture in the background, but it's not going to be centered on that. I know I do a lot of architecture photos. I'm into modern architecture, so I like taking photos of that. But just to sort of broaden my horizons and broaden what I'm teaching you guys, I'm going to be doing some photo editing featuring some models next week, so that should be a really cool tutorial for you guys. And I'm getting a hi from India 101. How's it going? Hello from Julian. Hey, Julian. And then from Mihai, I'm getting a hello as well. So thank you guys for joining me, and thank you as always for watching. Of course, as always, if you have any questions during this tutorial about either the tutorial I'm working on, the photo I'm editing here, or just really any tutorial you've watched from any previous date or from this week, or if you have any general GIMP questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat, and I will try to do my best to answer them while I'm editing. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. So I'm going to start by opening this photo, and I'm just going to do it from my recents. So I'll go to File, Open Recent, and let me go over here to, this is the unedited version that you guys will be able to download from my website. So I'll click on that there. So here is our unedited photo. It's a lot more bright, sort of almost to the brink of being blown out, and the colors aren't quite as good. So let me just do a quick comparison. Here's the after. Here's the before. Again, I'm going to try my best to replace the sky in this tutorial that I'm doing for you guys right now. So we'll see if we can get that done within the time frame here. It might be a slightly longer tutorial. So Julian, looks like first time live, same with Nothi. And again, sorry for the pronunciation if it's not correct. But yeah, thanks for joining. And yeah, you guys can interact. One of the cool things of going live. All right. So I've already got this scaled down to 1920 by 1280, and the file you guys can use is scaled down. But if you need to scale it down further for whatever reason, you can always go to Image, Scale Image. And I'm getting a hey. And thanks for joining me, Bruno. And all right, so I'm going to start by going to so after I've scaled it, I'll go to Colors, Shadows, Highlights. Sorry, I have somebody in my office that's trying to talk to me right now. I just had to wave them off. Anyway, so shadows, highlights, and all right, so the main thing with this image here is that the highlights, as you guys can probably tell, are really bright. I took this sort of in the middle of the day, so usually when you're taking photos, you want to do something around sunrise or sunset. That's when, you know, they call that the golden hour, and that is when the lighting is a little bit less harsh. It's a little bit more golden, so you get better colors out of your photos. But this day, I just kind of went for a walk in the middle of the day, and I took a photo. And so it's a little bit bright. So what I need to do is I need to tone down my highlights. And also, real quick, and I don't mean to ramble, but I didn't use a neutral density filter on my lens, which I do recommend using if you're going to be taking photos in the middle of the day. But in this case, I think a lot of you guys maybe can't afford or don't know how to use or just don't have an ND filter, a neutral density filter yet. So regardless of whatever the reason, if you have an overexposed photo like I do, you can just crank the highlights down here using my shadows highlights tool. And I featured this tool all by itself in my last tutorial I put up, so hopefully you guys check that out. And wow, 1:36 a.m. in India. That is pretty early. So thank you for checking out this video, or pretty late, I could say, in the middle of the night or in the wee hours of the morning. So I'm just adjusting the highlights here, and I don't want to turn them down too much. As you can see, we start getting this halo effect going on here. When we turn it down too much, we also lose some of the lighting, and it just looks a little bit artificial. I think the goal when you are editing photos is to make it look like the time when you took the photo. So it didn't look this blown out when I took the photo, so I want to try to restore this back to the way it looked when I took it. That's always a good rule of thumb. And then I'll just turn up the shadows a little bit because some of the details get lost in the shadows because it's so bright on the outside here. And I'm getting a lot of comments right now, so I will try to keep up with them as I edit. And Justin from Rhode Island, did you mean Rhode Island, or is it actually called Rhode Isle, Samuel? Thank you for joining me nonetheless. So Julian, yeah, feel free to ask the question anyway, and I'll see if I can help out while I'm editing with a quick answer. But I'm always open to whatever issues you're having within GIMP, and it could be an idea for another tutorial. So feel free to ask if you'd like. But anyway, we've adjusted, so you can see here's a before, and it was super blown out. And guys, feel free to help out as well. I know one of you offered Nothi to help, so feel free to help out if you know the answer and feel inclined to help. And all right, so before and after. So as you can see, the colors are a lot more, or the brightness is a lot more toned down here. It's a lot easier on the eyes, and it just looks a lot better overall. We still have work to do though, so we will get to that. And I did go over what these settings do, the radius and the compress, in my last tutorial. So you can see that if I turn the radius up, it is turning up the spatial extent to which this is working on the image. And it does actually look a little bit better with the radius turned up a little bit. It brings in some of the grittiness of that wood back. And if I compress this, if I turn the compression down a bit, that's also actually helping me a little bit. It's helping create a better final product there. So there's a before, there's an after. Maybe we could tone this down a bit. And same with the shadows. And I'll just go with that right there and click OK. I don't want to linger too much on the one tool. All right, so we're already looking a little bit better. As I mentioned, I am going to try to replace the sky here, time permitting. It's going to be a little bit difficult if I hold Control and zoom in with my mouse wheel. I do have a lot of detail in the tree right here. And then if I hold the space bar, I can kind of move over to the left part of my image. We've got some power lines here and some trees as well, so that can make it a little bit difficult to replace the sky. But I'll give it a try nonetheless. But before I do that, let me just get into the color balance here. So I'll go to Colors, Color Balance. And I'm getting a high from Puerto Vallarta. Sorry, I can't pronounce that. But thank you for joining me, Steve. And I'm getting a good morning from Fiji. That's awesome. That's actually a first that I've ever seen that. So thank you for joining me from Fiji, Ratu. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. And sorry, I don't think I have time to go back and look at your full question there. I think it has to do with exposing for nighttime photos. Usually that just involves setting a longer exposure on your camera. That's how you achieve that effect. That's not usually done within the photo editing program that you're using. You could recreate that using some techniques, but usually when cars are flying by at night and you've got like the streak going on with the lights, that has to do with creating a long exposure with your camera, and then that long exposure is going to start the exposure when let's say, for example, the car is on the far left side of your image, and then it stops the exposure when the car is on the far right side of your image, so it creates a streak of light, and that's how you get that cool effect. So hopefully that answered your question. All right, so next we're going to color balance here. So we'll start with the midtones. Keep an eye on, the more mid-tone parts of your image. So not the highlights, which are going to be these brighter parts, or the shadows, which is going to be in the dark here. The mid-tone should be more of like the wood going on here, maybe even this red here. And so for this image, there's a lot of red in the wood. It's, wood is usually associated with the color brown, but this particular type of wood has a little bit of a red hue to it. So I'm going to try to bring out some of that red here. I'm not going to overdo it. This would be considering overdoing it. And so I'm just going to bring that down a little bit. It's almost got this sort of like rusty, almost like copper color to it. The metal has it as well. And so I'm just going to bring out some of that red here like so. And now I'll try some magenta. The reason I don't want to do green, as you can see, is it kind of gives it a sickly color that I'm not into. So just a tiny bit of magenta. Not really one of the focal point colors in my image, so just a tiny bit there. And then you do have a lot of blue in the sky, obviously, but that is also going to counteract some of the colors in the wood. And I'm not a huge fan of having a ton of blue in the wood there, so I'm actually just going to leave this pretty much at 0. So there's a before and there's an after. You can already see a lot of difference there. And now I'm going to move on to my shadows. And guys, you can also use the super chat feature. That's a great way to stand out, and it's a great way to support the channel. It's basically a one-time donation, so feel free to use that super chat feature. Those are always appreciated. We had one of those in one of our live sessions, and it's definitely appreciated when you guys support the channel there, and it helps me pick your comment out from the rest. All right, so we are going to add a little bit of reds to these shadows, and you guys can see if I turn this way up, a lot of that is affecting this area right here. It does affect some of the mid-tone parts over here because there are a little bit of shadows going on in here as well, but it does mainly affect this part right here in my image because these are my shadows. So let me just turn that down a little bit. I don't want to get too crazy with the red. And then here we will try some magenta again, and then we'll work on some of the blue. So here's a before, here's an after. I added a little bit of yellow to that, probably not entirely necessary. So now we'll skip over to the highlights, and now I'm going to make some adjustments. So you'll see the highlight parts is going to affect, it will affect the sky for sure, but it's going to affect a lot of what's going on down here because this is a lot of our brighter parts of our image. So just keep an eye on this area here. And I don't like the red in that part, so I'm not going to do that. And the cyan doesn't look much better, but I will add a tiny bit of cyan to that. And now we'll try some greens. That doesn't look great. And we'll try some magentas there as well. Also not a huge fan of that, so I'm going to keep this pretty much set at 0. And then I will try the blues. And then let's try some yellows. So I think none of these really look great, so we don't want to really make too many changes to the colors and the highlights there. And so I'll just keep that as is right there. And here is a before, here's an after. And let me just see if I can add a little bit more red to the shadows here. I don't want to overdo it, so let me actually go back pretty much to where we were. And I'll click OK. And there we go. And let me just catch up on my comments real quick. And I do recommend, sharing links and things like that at your own risk. I see you guys talking about sharing links and stuff. Just keep that in mind. How to change a pattern in a texture. Orlando, thanks for joining us. That is going to be something that could probably be covered in its own tutorial, so I'm not going to get into that too much today. It's not something I can really provide a quick answer to. But there is, you can obviously go to your bucket fill tool, something like that, and you could change your patterns here. You could change to an entirely different pattern. I'm sure you probably knew about that, but thank you. And I see you're saying our tutorials are great. Thank you for that compliment. And all right, so I'm going to move on now. So we've got the color balance done. Next thing I want to do here is I'm going to adjust the saturation of this. So I'm going to turn it up a little bit. So come over here to saturation, and I'm just going to crank up the scale here. And as you can see, that's bringing out some of the colors in here. So that really looks good. Before, it looks a little bit flat. Here's after, it looks very colorful, very vibrant. We don't need to overdo it, but we do want to kind of hit right on that threshold, right on that line. So I'll click OK there. That's looking pretty good to me. And I'm also going to real quick go to colors. I'm going to try a couple other settings here. So for one, I'm going to do hue chroma. And I do have a lesson in my photography course on what hue chroma is. But essentially, hue is going to allow you to change the color of your image. And then chroma is more so the purity of the colors in the image. And then lightness, of course, is just how light or dark those colors are. So sometimes I like to try out the chroma. So you can see as I turn this way up, the reds in my image become that red primary color, the blues, the blue primary color, and then the yellows, same thing, the yellow primary color. You can see why this image works pretty well because there are all three primary colors in this, and so that kind of helps balance that image out. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I want to really add any or too much chroma. So I'm just going to add a very tiny amount because I think too much starts to make it look cartoony, and I'm not a huge fan of that. You can also test out shifting the hue here, seeing if any different hues look better than the original. So I'm not necessarily a fan of any of that, so I'm just going to set this back to 0. And then you can also test out the lightness. So I don't want to make it too light there. I'm just going to keep this set to 0. And here's before, here's an after. Let me turn that chroma down just a tiny bit, and I'll click OK. All right, so now we're going to move on to the levels tool. So I'll go to colors levels. And you can see here there's a pretty steep drop off with the shadows here. And so I'm just going to drag this shadow slider down to around where this starts to pick up here. But then I'm going to compensate by dragging the highlights over a bit as well. And the midtones as well here, this middle gray arrow. And so this is sort of helping me to add a little bit of contrast and also just sort of correct some of the levels going on in this image here. So there's a before, a little bit darker, there's after, it's a little bit brighter without blowing out any of those highlights there. Although I am going to make some adjustments before, after. So nice and bright, and it's nice and bright in the right areas. So I'll click OK. And actually one more thing I'm going to do is colors, curves. This is going to allow me to test out adding some more contrast. You guys will remember that I talk a lot about S-curves. So S-curves are going to create contrast in your images. So there's before, there's after. You can see there's a little bit more contrast in here. Maybe we could tone down this part right here by dragging that point in. And now I'm going to click OK. And now we have a nice bright image here. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to work on bringing that sky in here and seeing if I can replace the sky on here. Because although I do have a nice bright blue sky, and there's nothing wrong with it really, I actually really like it, I'm going to see if I can just kind of make it have a little bit more dimension, a little bit more depth by adding in some clouds. So now what I'll do is I'll find my cloud photo. Hopefully it's not too hard to find in here. And just searching through my downloads. Here we go. Right click and go to open with, and I'll choose GIMP. I could just click and drag this, by the way, as well. But here we have the photo of the clouds. And just going to hold Control and zoom out a bit. So I'm going to hold Control C, and then I'll come over here and hit Control V, and that'll paste my clouds as a floating selection. So I'll just click here to put this on its own new layer, and let me just name this Clouds and hit Enter. And I don't want this being on top of my main image, but I do want to make sure that this is the right size. So let me just come over here and grab my scale tool, click on here, and so that is actually the right size, so I'll just hit reset and exit out. So now I'm just going to click and drag this below our image. Obviously there's a lot of differences in the color and everything between the cloud image and our original image of our home. So I'm going to right click on here, and what I want to do is I want to add an alpha channel to this. That's going to add transparency so that when I erase the background, it's going to reveal the cloud image below it. So I'm going to come down here to add alpha channel. That will add transparency to this image. And now I'm going to attempt to erase the sky here. So when I was doing this before the live tutorial started, I was experimenting with the best way to quickly erase the sky. And it is pretty hard, again, considering that we do have this tree going on right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try two different methods. I'm going to start with my lasso tool, and I'm going to hold Control and zoom in, and I'm basically going to erase all the stuff that's pretty easy to erase by clicking. And so when I click, I'll create a point, and then as I click, you'll see that each point, there's a straight line in between each node that's created here. So I can zoom in a bit here, click, and I'm going to click around the house here. Because this is a fairly geometric house, that makes it easy for me to create straight lines and just mask out the sky here. So I'm just going to click right here, and you can see we've created a straight line here. It doesn't have to be perfect, so if it overlaps with parts of the house, that's okay. And so I'm going to come up here and just click right there. And it does get a little bit pixelated here around the edges of the house. And so I'm just going to maybe hold Control, zoom out a bit here, hold the space bar to move around my image. I'm going to click up there, and we can always move these nodes later if they're not in the exact right spot, so don't worry about that. So I'm just following the outline of this house. If there's more detail, I can hold Control and zoom in with my mouse wheel. And for now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to get super in depth with the details here. But you can see I am just outlining the roof of the house here. So here we have a nice straight line. So we'll just click there. And then I'll just come over here. So here's where we start to get to the tree. So you can make a decision here. If you want to save time, you can basically selection out this tree and not deal with it. But in my case, I'm just going to roughly go around it like so. And I'll come over here, again, just roughly cutting this tree out, and we'll end it there. And so I'll hold Control and zoom out, and now I'm just going to go around the outer edges of my image and then make sure I connect this. And by the way, the reason I'm not using something like the Select by Color tool is that there is actually a variation of colors here because the sky is pretty much a gradient. So we've got like a very light blue down here, and then we have a darker blue up here. So it is kind of hard to use that Select by Color tool and not accidentally select colors that are within the house. So that's why I'm just going to draw this with the lasso tool. I'll hit the Enter key, and that'll create a selection area. And I think this is pretty good. I'm not going to make any adjustments to this part of the selection. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here, right-click on my image, and go to Add Layer Mask. And I'm going to come over here and choose Selection, and I'll click Add. And that actually selected out the opposite, so I'll hit Control-Z, right-click, Add Layer Mask. Control-Z is to undo, by the way. I think a lot of you know that, but some of you may not. And now I'm going to hit Invert Mask, and I'll click Add. So that will invert our selection, and now you can see that sky going on there. That color is completely not matching right now. That's okay. And so now I'll hit Control-Shift-A to deselect that. And so it's done a pretty good job here of masking out the sky, but obviously we've got a lot going on here that we need to fix. And again, time permitting, I'm going to only spend so much time trying to fix this background here, but let's grab our selection tool again, and any part that's really geometric that can simply be masked out using this lasso tool, we're going to do that. So I'll hit the enter key here, and what I can do now when I want to add parts to my layer mask here, I can click on my layer mask, grab my bucket fill tool, change the color to black, and then fill that color in. Let me hit Control Z because I need to make sure that I'm setting my fill type to foreground color fill. So once I've got that done, I can go ahead and fill that in, Control Shift A. So that is sort of a rudimentary way of getting rid of what's going on here. I think we can erase the power line. I don't think it's super important. So what I'll do is I'll grab my brush tool, turn the size up, but not too much. And I'm just going to erase my power line. I do want to keep the trees because I like the trees, but I think the power lines are not totally necessary. And as I paint, I'm using the brackets on my keyboard to shrink the size of my brush. And I can hold the Shift key and that'll draw my brush in straight line mode. So you can see I can just go back and forth until I erase out the parts of the sky that I want to erase. And so I'm just going to move around my image here and use my brush to erase any parts of the sky that we did not erase before. And this tree is really hard to see, so we may not perfectly erase around this tree, but I'm going to try to do my best to do so. So I'm using Control my mouse wheel to zoom in, and then I'm just painting out my tree here. And I didn't mean to use my Wacom tablet today, but I forgot it, so I'm just going to use my mouse. So probably most of you have a mouse anyway and not a Wacom, but would be slightly quicker to do this with the Wacom tablet. Again, if you guys have any questions about this tutorial I'm doing right now or any tutorials, feel free to ask. And I think I'm just going to make the decision to get rid of this tree here. It's not super important to what's going on, so let me just get rid of that. If I had time, I probably would keep that tree, but I think just because I want to get this done in a reasonable amount of time, I'm just going to get rid of this tree. So I'll just increase this. So to change the brush size, I was using the brackets on my keyboard. So those are the keys that are to the left of the backslash key. So it's like right above the enter key and to the left. Those are the brackets. I'm going to keep this tree here, this larger tree. And let me just use that left bracket on my keyboard to decrease the size of my brush. Get rid of that. So you guys can see the progress going on here. And it's probably not imperative to keep this tree either, especially with the colors of the skies being so different. Let me, before I proceed with erasing the background here, let me work on the color of this background sky. And so I'm going to click on here, and remember we went over the hue chroma slider earlier. We're going to probably use that. That's going to be a factor in here. But real quick, I do need to match the lightness of this sky with the brightness of the sky in the windows here. And of course, you can always use your move tool and move this around to see if you can get a better positioning of this photo here. Maybe something like that. So now let's go to filter, or let's go to colors. I'm going to try hue saturation first. So this is allowing me to shift the hue, so you can see that now we can change this to more of a brighter cyan color. Maybe turn the lightness up a bit. And I think I chose a sky that has a totally different color than the original image, so that might be an issue. But let's see if we can work here. Brightness contrast. So that's fitting a little bit better now, but we still have work to do with the actual color of this. So let's go to the color balance real quick, and we'll try to add some more cyans to this. You can't overdo it because it will start to affect the overall color and it won't look as genuine. So that is definitely something we need to play around with and keep an eye on. And now I'll switch over to my highlights. And I'm just going to switch this back to 0 and add some yellows in here. So that's helping us get in the right direction. This image that I chose is maybe not the best image. So if all else fails, I'll just change the image that I'm using. But let's go back to, actually let's try color temperature here, play around with this, see if that can help us out. So that actually is helping us quite a bit there. So I'm just turning the color temperature down. So that is looking a little bit better, so I'll click OK. I'm getting a hi from Odessa. Thanks for joining me. So I'm getting a question about HDR images in GIMP. HDR, I could do a tutorial. I have one on my Udemy course that goes over HDR. From what I found, there's actually like two concepts when it comes to HDR. So the first is like, you know, HDR referring almost to like exposure bracketing. That is something that I actually did in one of my live photo editing sessions. So check out the exposure bracketing photo editing session. But then I've also seen HDR referred to as just getting that like National Geographic, really sharpened look in your images. And that's one that I go over in my Udemy course. So definitely feel free to check that out. But I'll see if I can get a tutorial up on my YouTube channel that covers that topic. But I'm just going to continue working on the colors of my clouds here. And so let's go to colorize. So colorize is basically, the definition of colorize is like if your image were a desaturated image and then you looked at it through a colored glass. That is what colorize is supposed to emulate. So let me do something here. Let me cancel out of here and just duplicate this. And now I'll go to colors and colorize. And now I'm going to choose more of a cyan color here for this. And I'll click OK. And I'll click OK again. And now I'm going to go to mode, and then I'm going to try some of these layer modes here and see if these will help bring my sky to the correct color. That actually doesn't look too bad. So that's looking pretty decent as well. So let's go with something like this right here for now. So I'm getting a hi from Brazil. Sergio, thanks for joining me. All right, so I'm going to go to colors, levels, and see if we can adjust the levels of this as well and help this further blend in with our original image here. So that's looking really close. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it does have to, be somewhat close to the original color. So I'm going to go with that for now, and let's finish working on editing the background out here, and then we'll see how this looks. And so I'm going to grab my paintbrush tool again, click on the layer mask, and I'm going to just zoom in here. And I'm just going to paint on this layer mask with the black. And let me just get caught up on my comments here, make sure I'm not missing anything. All right, so moving on, I'm just going to continue painting out on this layer mask here. And this is a bit of a tedious process. Usually I speed this part of my tutorial up when I do like a recording. So with this being live, this is something that you guys get to sit through, which is, I'm sure, super fun. By the way, now's a good time to ask questions as well. So I'm going to work on this tree, which is kind of an irregular shape here. This might also be expendable just because it is so light and it's hard to see against this original background here. By the way, how many of you guys checked out the Shadows Highlights tutorial from earlier this week? Let me know if you did in the comments there. Yeah, you know what? I'm just going to erase this out because I think it's going to be more trouble than it's worth to keep that. And we're going to move over to this part of the image here. And I think I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to get rid of this tree because I think the tree is going to cause more of a headache than it is going to, look good. So that's just going to be an artistic decision I'm going to make there. And for the sake of time, because I see tutorials getting a little on the long side and some of you guys are dropping off, so let me just work on getting rid of this tree here. And there's some clouds starting to show up in the background there, so that's what those marks are. So I'm going to hold Control, zoom in a bit there, and I'm just going to get rid of all these trees right here. I'm getting a good tutorial from Omar, so I appreciate that. I know this part of the tutorial is a bit tedious, the erasing of the background, but sometimes it is necessary when you're editing photos. I did actually like the original sky, so I almost feel like we could have just kept that original sky and been good, but sometimes you got to replace the sky, and I know a lot of people do that, and I actually have an entire tutorial dedicated to how to replace the sky, so if you guys ever want to check out a more in-depth tutorial on erasing the sky, feel free to check that out. And that was for a tutorial where it was sort of like a dreary day out, so this tutorial is like it was a nice bright sunny day out. Not usually a time when you would replace the sky. That tutorial, it was like overcast and didn't look great, so what I did was I ended up brightening the building, and then I just replaced the sky to have a nice cloudy looking sky on a nice bright day out. So ended up making the photo look a lot better there. So what I'm going to do is just use these portions of the image to, use these structures right here to get rid of, everything above these. And you can also turn the hardness up. I have my hardness turned down a little bit. So when you turn the hardness up, it's going to make the brush a little bit less fuzzy, so it'll basically erase more of what you're painting over. I was using a very soft brush, so that's probably why a lot of what I was trying to erase was not getting erased there. I try not to have too hard of a brush because then it does become a little bit too jagged of an edge, and you could tell that you've erased parts of your image. And I'm just going to, again, for the sake of time, quickly erase some of this stuff right here. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. If I had more time, I would definitely spend more time erasing all that. But there you can see this looks pretty good, even though, we could definitely spend more time on here. And so now what I'm going to do to just wrap this up is I'm going to add a vignette. So I'll create a new layer and just name this vignette and hit enter. And then I'm going to go to filters, light and shadow, vignette. And now we've got a nice vignette here. So we'll spread that out. So I'm using the radius to, you'll see that it's closing in on the corners when or closing in on the center of the image when I decrease this, and when I increase it, it expands it out a bit. So I'm basically just trying to frame this house since that's the main part of my image. So I don't want too much of the vignette spilling over into the house. And so I'll just go with that. And now I'm going to go ahead and decrease the opacity of this. And you can also set the layer here back to normal. I have that set to multiply for some reason. So we've adjusted the brightness of our vignette there by dragging the opacity slider. And now what I like to do, especially with these images where I composite multiple images in here, I did a lot of work to try to make the sky here look like the sky that's being reflected in this part of the image. It still could use a little bit of tweaking, but for the sake of time, I'm going to leave it as is. But what I like to do is I like to export this out as a single JPEG, or you can also just go over to, I believe it's layer, and where it's one of these options here, new from visible. So that'll put everything onto its own single layer. If I shift click, it'll hide all the other layers, so now everything's on this one single layer. And then what we can do with that is we can kind of come over here and just adjust some of the colors, maybe the color temperature, and that way everything is edited with the same settings, and that kind of can help sometimes bring the overall image together and make the colors blend a little bit better. And then I'll go to colors, color balance, and I'll just adjust the color balance here real quick. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. And I'll come over to my shadows. I don't want to add too much yellow there. And then lastly, my highlights here. So I'll click OK. And then last thing is I'll just go to filters, enhance, and I would usually do this actually on like the original image here before I put everything on its own layer, but then just go to filters, enhance, sharpen, and that'll just sharpen the overall photo there. And I'll click OK. And I got a question, do I prefer adjusting the color balance like that over using curves? I typically use the curves for when I'm trying to add contrast to the image. So I did that a little bit earlier, colors, curves. You can use the curves here and change the channel value to the reds, greens, and blues. That is one way to do it. I do prefer doing this way. I don't feel like I have as much control, or at least it's not as easy when you're trying to perform the color balance using the curves, just because there's a lot of different factors. This is almost like a 3D way to edit your colors versus the color balance tool is more like a 2D way to do that. So I just prefer to use the color balance tool for the actual color balance portion. But all right, that's going to be it for this image. Now I can export this to a JPEG. So I'll go to File, Export As. I'm just going to change the name of this to Edited. And then I'll go to, actually I don't have to select the file type because I already have this set to JPEG, but you could come over here and search for JPEG image. And then I'll hit Export. I've already done this once, but I'll hit Replace. And I'm just going to turn my quality up to 100. And there we go. All right, so that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you guys liked it. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/daviesmediadesign. You can also visit our website at daviesmediadesign.com. You can enroll in our GIMP photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher on Udemy. And of course, you could support our channel and help us grow by becoming a patron on Patreon. And all of those links should be in the description. If not, I'll make sure to include those after the tutorial. Otherwise, thanks for watching, guys. I'm getting a hi from Colombia. Alberto, thanks for watching. And we'll see you next time.